Hey everyone, I'm Adam. I've got to say I'm really excited to be here today because I get to talk about two of my favourite subjects, simplicity and of course progressive enhancement. So thanks a lot for having me. I want to start out today with us using our imagination. I want you to imagine your life with less tooling, less libraries, less frameworks, less debugging, less noise, less debates, and less bullshit. The kind of bullshit that Brad Frost talks about. Less of the superfluous, less of the unnecessary, less of the unnecessarily complex. All of this happening while browsers get better and connection speeds get faster without any effort on our part whatsoever. I think what you're imagining is a more simpler and more straightforward tech stack, particularly on the front-end side, and a better experience, one that embraces the web and its conventions rather than tries to trample all over them and enhances it too much. And with all of this complexity out of the way, we can make room for the basics, which might just make the biggest difference to our products, whilst also making our lives as designers and developers that bit easier too. I've always been obsessed with simplicity, and I think as designers and developers, we have simplicity somewhat baked into us. We just need to unlock it. One early memory I have was when I was 15 or 16 years old, and I was revising for my maths GCSE. And when it was time to revise, I would go to the quietest place in our house, which was our dining room. And in there, we had a big dining room table. And I would go in there with my three bare essentials, my pencil case and my calculator and my mock exam paper and nothing else. And I would declutter the entire physical space, even though I needed a very small portion of the table, so that I could declutter my mental space so that I could focus on this difficult subject. If I didn't do that, I'd find it really difficult. Today, this is my desktop, really clutter-free. I'm an Alfred keystroke away from my favorite application. And this is my home screen. I've got all of my most used applications along the bottom in close proximity to my thumb, otherwise clutter-free again. And when I'm at work, I meticulously close down program after I finish using it, so that which has two benefits along a similar theme. One is that I only have open what I need so I can focus better, but the computer works better when it's doing less. So when I'm doing less and when the computer's doing less, we both work better. Now, web design and development is hard. And it's true, how can we make this more simpler for ourselves and for our users? It's true that simple is complicated, but simple can also be simple. And it's this latter variety of simple that I really want to focus on today, because I don't think we do that nearly enough, and I think there's some huge wins to be had. Now, you might be asking yourself what all of this has to do with progressive enhancement. Well, progressive enhancement revolves around people. People either consuming an experience or people designing and building that experience to be consumed. And if there's one thing I know about people, it's that we love complicated. We hone in on complicated. We're flies attracted to complicated or something like that. And I came across a story recently which I'd like to share with you about how we forget about the basics and we jump to complicated. This is Atul Gawande. He's a professor of surgery at Harvard Medical School. And he was approached by the World Health Organization to see if he could reduce the death rates during surgery. Was there a lack of training or was there a lack of technology? Gawande found it was actually none of these things, and he spoke to other experts in other high-risk industries such as aviation to find out more. And what he found was that there was normally one of three problems. The first was problems of ignorance, the second was problems of technology, and the third was problems of ineptitude. Up to now, all surgical attention had been focused on the first two. The average surgeon had 10 to 15 years worth of training. The average surgeon performed up to 4,000 different procedures and prescribed up to 6,000 drugs. But unlike the aviation industry, they had forgotten about the third problem. The problem that highly skilled people make basic mistakes. The airline industry solved this by having the concept of basic checklists. So the pilot would read aloud to the co-pilot before takeoff, reading off things like the brakes, making sure they're set, and the elevator trim, and making sure the autopilot was disconnected. So what Gawande did was he suggested the concept of basic checklists before surgical procedures, checking off things like the patient's name, the area for procedure, and any known allergies. At first, the medical staff resisted they found it demeaning to do these basic things. But later, the results came in. And the death rates across all hospitals tested had dropped by a whopping 47%, which is millions and millions of people. And if this had come from a technology or a drug, it would have been hailed as a miracle cure. But here, it came from just doing the most basic things. Because the basic things are most important of all. And it's a normal human reaction to forget about these basic things and jump to complicated because we are seduced by complexity. And I think that's what's happening in our industry. I should get some water. So yeah, I think that's what's happening in our industry. We're so busy thinking about the JavaScript this, the framework that, the carousel this, the Ajax that. We're almost rewriting everything we did last year, this year, but in a completely new technology or architecture. And I'm not so sure all of this is adding value, or as much value as we may think we're adding. Now, there are lots of reasons why us humans do complicated, and I want to share with you just 2 reasons today. The first is contribution. We feel as humans that if we put a lot of effort into something, then we get a lot of value out, but I found this to be infrequently the case. And I want to share with you a portion of an article written by my friend Mark Jenkins, a designer here in London. And it's entitled Contribution. It's a tale of 2 designers, designer A and designer B, and their approach. Designer A spends an hour of their time making 5 screens because they know they need to design 5 screens. They're not trying to change the world, they achieve what they set out to do. Designer B takes an entire day to make just 1 screen because they're obsessed with moving pixels, but they are stuck, they can't let go. They end up doing less because of their own insecurities about their contribution. They create the same thing over and over. They end up with unfinished designs, or sometimes they go right back to the beginning. Designer A understands that there's no perfect. Designer B believes perfection exists. Their belief of perfect is jaded by their own inability to understand the solution to the problem. And in some cases, they are making a solution for a non-existent problem. Designer A thinks, designer B overthinks. Designer A's contribution is greater because they think about the necessary. Designer B's contribution is lower because they think about the unnecessary. Designer B is a blocker to themselves and the rest of their team. Designer B relies on what they know. Designer A relies on what they don't know. Designer A releases early to learn, then goes back to improve. Designer B releases late. They learn less because they believe they have perfected something without testing. Designer A works with context. Designer B has none. Designer A learns. Designer B thinks they don't have to. Now, both A and B are designers, but the difference in their contribution is huge. And I guess if I was trying to sum this up really nicely for you today, it would be that value only has a value when its value is valued. And in the case of enhancements, I'm not so sure about all the enhancements that we go about adding are always adding value. I have so many examples of this, but I'll share with you this one. Back in 2008, I was working on the Boots.com project, and in particular, their single-page checkout. And it had all of the enhancements. It had a bunch of, each step was behind an accordion. They would expand and collapse as you go through. No page refreshes, a bunch of Ajax, all crammed onto one single document. The point here is that we put a whole load of effort in up front to design it, to build it, to test it, release it, and finally get it under users' noses. And what we found was that it didn't work very well at all. So we ended up going back to basics. And we split each of these steps on a single page of its own, each with a page refresh, without almost any enhancements. And the results came in from doing that. And it was brilliant, and we had some great results. And as history repeats itself, I was working at Just Eat, almost 6 years later, I think. And again, on a similar vein, they had a single page checkout too. And we ended up doing the same thing when we were tasked with exploring solutions to improve conversion. And this is what one of the pages looked like. Again, very little enhancements, plenty of white space, completely clutter-free. Only almost 1 question on that page, and maybe a sprinkling of JavaScript as an enhancement just to save a round trip for the validation. And the results came in from doing this, and this resulted in almost 2 million extra orders per year. And that's orders, not revenue. And that's what 2 million people look like, if you can see that. So obviously the business benefited, obviously the users benefited. You could say that I became less marketable because instead of my CV saying built these rich single-page checkout with all the fancies, it now said built 4 web pages with 4 forms on them. But it's a little bit how the surgeons found it demeaning to do the basic things, and we saw the amazing results there. And likewise here, it's not about me or my CV, it's about the results for the user. The second one is technology. Sometimes we paint ourselves into a corner with the choice of technology, and I'll explain myself. So Jekyll is a good example. For those that don't know what Jekyll is, it's a technology written in Ruby, you put Markdown in and you get static HTML out, which is, it's blog aware, so ultimately it produces articles. And each article is made up of HTML. This is great because there's no moving parts, it's super, super fast, and I use it myself. The problem comes when we want to add dynamic content, such as comments. And what I typically see is the use of Disqus comments. And what Disqus is, for those that don't know, is a JavaScript library that loads and injects comments as an enhancement. Now, you could say this is an acceptable degradation point. At least I provided my article for everybody, and the lucky ones get the comments. But we know that there's so many failure points. It's been talked about today. And ultimately, if we think about what a comment is, it's just the same as what an article is. It's just some text. And we know we can deliver this for everybody and deliver a better experience. And ultimately, the reason why this happens is because we put our needs as a developer first before our needs of the users. And as this man says, as Jeremy Keith says, oh, it's not going. If I had to choose between making something my problem and making something my user's problem, then I'd choose to make it mine every time, and I think this is bang on. So what can we achieve with just the basics? I've more than alluded to it already with the Just Eat and Boots case studies, but I'm thinking about text, links, buttons, forms, pages. These are the conventions of the web. These are basic building blocks. And if we just hone in on, say, just text, there's so much we can do with text. Have we got the right font? Have we got the right font size? Have we got the right color? Have we got the right color contrast? Have we got the right letter spacing, the right line heights? Are we showing enough text? Are we showing too much text? Are we surfacing it at the right time? Are we humanizing our copy? Is it user-friendly? And that's just text. I won't go into the other ones because we haven't got time. I'm also thinking about mobile first, which to me just really means small screen first, which to me just really, really means essential first, which to me just really, really, really means essential only. And I think this has been a real boon for the industry because it's forced us to think about what is truly essential to a small screen, which normally speaking scales up really well to a big screen. We've got to stop fearing white space. We've got to stop fearing the page refresh, because when we trim the fat for all and we focus on this, then these things don't actually become a problem, and it's actually easier for the user. And I'm not trying to say that we should oversimplify, and I'm not saying that there isn't a need for complicated. There is a need for complicated sometimes. But I just think if here's complicated and here's really, really simple, then I think we spend a lot of time over here, and I think we need to bring the dial back towards the simple side. And when it comes to progressive enhancement, it's not a prescription to enhance. It's a wonderful strategy should we so find out that an enhancement is going to add value. But we don't have to enhance. So how do we get this into our everyday lives? We all know the benefits of iterative development, and I think it lends itself perfectly to progressive enhancement and user testing. So what I'm suggesting is deliver the core experience first, test release that will be really quick, and if it works with users, great, move on to the next feature, you're done. Happy times, you've spent a little effort doing it. And if it doesn't work, then go back to these basic things. What can we do with just those basics? Can we practice thoughtful reduction rather than mindless addition? And again, after that iteration, you might be able to move on, in which case, great, you've done it in 2 iterations and you've learned something. And if that doesn't work, then you have my permission to enhance. You don't really need my permission. But yeah. And this is really great for momentum and morale, because all the way along, you might have delivered something really small, but that added value. But if all the way along you've learned something as well, and that keeps momentum going. But it's also good for emotion, because as developers and designers, we get emotionally attached to the stuff that we design and the stuff that we build. And if we put a whole load of effort in up front, we get more emotionally attached. But if we're delivering little and often as a team, and we're learning as a team, then we remove that element as well. And as we've seen, small things can equate to really small wins, and these are really worth celebrating. But small steps can actually mean big wins. And this is really what I want for us. This is what I want for our industry. This is what I want for our users. Thank you.
Brilliant. All right, great stuff.